If it's Wednesday, the first debates of the 2024 campaign are set. President Biden and former President Trump agree to face off in June and September as polls show a neck-and-neck race, with Trump's criminal trial raging on. Plus, major developments across the wars in Ukraine and Gaza as Russia pushes deeper into Ukraine's second-largest city, and President Biden moves forward with a new weapon shipments to Israel, despite fears of an imminent ground operation in Rafah. And opening statements are underway in Senator Menendez's criminal corruption trial as the embattled Democrat faces accusations he accepted bribes of cash, gold, and a luxury car to benefit foreign governments. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Yamiche Alcindor in Washington. We begin with news from the presidential race. Today, President Biden and former President Donald Trump announced they have agreed to face off against each other on the big stage with debates in June and September. That comes amid signs that the Biden campaign is looking for a way to shift the trajectory of this race at a moment when it appears Trump's criminal trial might not. The Biden campaign released a video this morning accepting Trump's offer to debate. Biden is bypassing the Commission on Presidential Debates while taking a dig at Trump's current trial schedule.
Donald Trump lost 2 debates to me in 2020. And since then, he hadn't shown up for debate. Now he's acting like he wants to debate me again. Well, make my day, pal. I'll even do it twice. So let's pick the dates, Donald. I hear you're free on Wednesdays.
Within a couple of hours, both President Biden and former President Trump had accepted invitations to first debate on June 27th and a second debate on September 10th. For the record, neither of those will be on a Wednesday, and the Trump campaign says it wants even more debates. It's notable that the move by the Biden campaign set all of this in motion. Incumbent candidates aren't typically this eager to debate their challengers unless they think they're trailing. This all comes as Trump has successfully delayed his criminal trials in Florida, Georgia, and D.C., potentially until after the November election, and is amid his ongoing hush money trial in Manhattan, which does not appear to be cracking Trump's coalition. My NBC News colleagues recently talked to voters who have supported Trump, who are now leaning that way, in battleground states, Michigan and Georgia. Here's what they had to say.
You're considering voting for him again?
We'll have to see what happens, this outcome, right now.
Does the trial impact whether or not you can support him?
It does. Yeah, he could be in jail, He could be in jail. But Biden's not any better, so it's like, it's a hard choice.
If Donald Trump is convicted, would that impact how you view him as a candidate?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
You're between voting for Donald Trump and staying home. Would a conviction impact that decision for you?
No.
It wouldn't be a factor at all?
No.
Why not?
I feel like he's been hunted down.
Has this trial changed your opinion, even caused you to waver or question that at all?
No, it's actually caused me to support him more. We're in an election year. They've had how many years to go after this? At least a couple of years. So the question people are beginning to ask themselves, like I did, is like, why now?
Show of hands, if he were convicted, would you continue to support him?
Absolutely.
Yes. You too, yes.
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, because, again, we haven't seen anything yet. I don't want to write anyone off prematurely. I would not do that.
You're open to a conviction changing your mind?
I'm open to not voting, yes.
So the question, Stan, is there anything that could shake this race up? Is it possible that a debate shakes things up for the Biden campaign more than the criminal trial of Donald Trump? Our friend Chuck Todd argues that President Biden needs to shape what voters think about him and not his opponent. He writes, the voters Biden needs the most right now are voters who have been flooded with Trump attacks for 8 years. The most obvious way to try to improve Biden's weakness perception is to put Biden out there more often and in more places that aren't so controlled. And NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd joins me now on set. Also with us is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Dasha Burns is covering all things Trump for us. And then Blaine Alexander has the view from voters in one of our key decider counties. So, Monica, I want to start with you. President Biden and former President Donald Trump have now agreed to debates in 2 dates. How did this all come together, and what is the White House in particular and the Biden campaign hoping to get out of this, and how it might benefit the president, of course?
Well, it moved really fast today, Yamiche, but we are learning that there were some back-channel discussions, some informal conversations between the Biden and Trump teams in recent weeks, and that's because the president did an interview with Howard Stern recently where he said he would be happy to debate the former president anywhere, anytime, sort of using some of that language that we've heard from Donald Trump over the course of recent months. So after that, there was a little bit of this back and forth between the teams where they were sort of plotting, in a way, a format that would bypass the Commission on Presidential Debates entirely. They both sort of had an interest in doing away with what we've seen in past cycles and instead kind of figuring out and hashing out the terms between themselves and the individual networks that have committed to hosting these two debates. But for the Biden team, this is a little bit of a risk. It's a little bit of a gamble because we've never really seen these general election matchups so early in the cycle. But at the same time, I'm told by Biden campaign advisors, it's a moment where they feel that people are dialing in a little sooner than maybe in your traditional cycle in the fall. They're saying essentially we can't wait that long. And that is in terms of the June argument, what they're saying. But then in terms of September also, you have to remember that early voting is going to be starting essentially right after when this debate takes place in some key places. And then it will kind of be on a rolling deadline from there. So they're saying that there are really important things that are going to be happening before November where they want to get out and have this contrast argument on full display that they say really October, when those traditional debates used to be held, is simply just too late for. Yamiche.
It's interesting when you are talking about sort of their view of why they changed this format. So I wonder, what should we expect from President Biden in this new format? And is there any way that this is not going to just turn into him sort of bashing Donald Trump, especially when you think about the fact that this announcement video took place while he was really swinging at the ongoing criminal trial that Donald Trump is still stuck in?
And you're going to see some really distinct changes from past general election debates. They have agreed that there won't be any kind of an audience. There won't be people in the hall reacting. Instead, this debate is going to take place really just with the moderators in the room and a TV studio, with a commitment to do what they've tried in the past but sometimes has been difficult, which is to control the microphone of the person, of the candidate who's not supposed to be talking at the moment. Remember that some of these debates have gone a little bit off the rails. There's been a lot of crosstalk and not a lot of substance sometimes achieved when that was the focus. So they're going to try to get around that, but that seems to be a very, very difficult challenge, we know. But for President Biden, he's going to be coming off of these two pretty big foreign trips. He's going to be traveling, participating in summits, meeting with allies and world leaders. And the Biden team argues that coming off of that, he'll be able to make this argument about contrast with Donald Trump on the world stage. And they're going to be able to try to make all of these larger arguments they want to make about democracy and about what a potential next term for Donald Trump could look like, in their view, the dangers they would say of that, by trying to cite the things he's doing while being president, while being in office, and then going to a debate like this.
And Dasha, I have to come to you because, of course, you're all in on Trump world. How are they reacting to these debates and this change? And is the Trump campaign at all worried that maybe they sent the bar a little too low for President Biden when we think about the fact that he now is going to be able to have multiple times to be able to go back and forth with Donald Trump?
Right. Well, and they actually made that mistake a little bit with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis way back in the primary. Of course, he was knocked out in Iowa, but they set the bar so low in terms of his ability to sort of, communicate with the average voter that anytime he was at all competent at that or on the debate stage, he got accolades for it because the bar was so low. But no, I mean, Trump world has been wanting this. They have been eagerly awaiting and wanting to debate. They feel like they will really be able to highlight that contrast with the two of them on the stage. Remember, and polling continues to bear this out, that even though they are not so far apart in age, voters are much more concerned about the stamina of President Joe Biden, about the age of President Joe Biden. They aren't as concerned about that when it comes to former President Trump. And so while, the Biden campaign is focusing on the substance, for Trump and the Trump campaign, they know that his greatest asset is just to be able to connect with those voters, to get that base riled up, kind of no matter what he says. It's more how he says it rather than what he says exactly. And so they just want to be able to see those two men up on the stage. They think that is going to be a benefit to former President Trump.
Well, as you talk about Donald Trump wanting to rile up his base. He's not going to have an audience here, as Monica just mentioned, to rile up in studio during this debate. And I mean, I have to mention that we were all, I think, political world shocked when he brought Bill Clinton's accusers to that debate with Hillary Clinton when it was in 2016. So I wonder, sort of, what are you hearing from Trump world on the idea that there isn't going to be a crowd there in the way that, when we know that, of course, Donald Trump loves crowds, loves audiences?
Yeah, that's definitely a concession on the part of the Trump team. He thrives off of crowds. We've seen him completely sort of take over the stage and take up all the oxygen in the room when he has a crowd in front of him. So that's a challenge for Trump and a benefit to Biden. But I think that, you know, what Trump has been saying all along is anytime, anywhere, basically under any conditions. And so they are making the statement that they are willing to do this just to get Biden on that stage. It's going to be a different dynamic for him. There will be certain hijinks that they maybe would have pulled if there were an audience that they won't be able to now. But again, the goal for the Trump team has just been to get those two men head-to-head, face-to-face on a debate stage, Amish.
Well, thank you so much to Dasha and to Monica. And Blaine, I want to come to you. We played some of your interviews of conservative Georgia voters not being swayed by this trial, which, of course, is in some ways not surprising, but also pretty surprising because it's the trial of a former president. So how much are their stances really influenced on their continued support of Trump and the idea that really his base hasn't wanted to move or come off of supporting him no matter what really happens here?
I think that plays a big role, Yamish. A couple of the people that I spoke with, one of them being the chair of the county Republican Party, told me that, you know, when you talk about the other people, you know, when you kind of go back a few months to earlier in the primary season, Ron DeSantis was still in the race, Nikki Haley was still in the race, and both he and a very active volunteer tell me that they spoke with people who were really rooting for those other candidates. In fact, they were among them themselves. Both of them were going for Ron DeSantis. When he dropped out of the race, though, they said that it was certainly notable that Ron DeSantis got behind former President Trump. And they said that they feel kind of helped move some more people into the Donald Trump column. They also, as one volunteer told me in her words, because, you know, they looked around, maybe they were going for Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, but when they looked around and they said, well, we're going to get in line with our party because this is better than the alternative. Now, it's interesting when I talked with these voters because there were about 5 people that I spoke with across a couple of different panels, all of them involved in different ways, very wide cross-section, but all of them were certainly united in one thing. They made it clear that the trial is not dissuading them from supporting the former president. One of them told me that she did talk to a few people. She has spoken with some people in her circle who say they don't have the appetite for this. There are people whose votes are up for grabs. It's just not the people that I spoke with. So here's a little snippet of that conversation. This is Sammy Baker. He runs the Republican Party here in Gwinnett County, and here's what he had to say. Take a look.
Do you think that a conviction would move the needle in any way, would take some of these voters who say that they are, you know, steadfastly for Trump and make them say no?
I don't really think so. I mean, from me talking to everyone in our party and everybody that we deal with, even what we figured out is, you know, 80% of what we all want is the same. And the 3.5 years we've had of Biden has really, I don't really think those trials are, and now it looks like none of them other than New York is even going to be in the picture until after November.
So in your conversations, people are willing to overlook that. They're willing to look past that, the trials, the cases, all of that.
Absolutely.
So, Yamish, a couple of things about this entire conversation that surprised me. One, you saw in that second group of voters that I spoke to, there were 2 black voters there, one named Antonio, the other named Lisa. Both of them in the past have cast ballots for Barack Obama, but they are now repeat Trump voters, Trump supporters. And they kind of said that the criminal trials, at least for Antonio, are making him more emphatic in his support of Donald Trump. And Lisa said that she's spoken with other people who feel the same. So this isn't the first time I've heard that, Yamish. I've heard it from other voters as well. They said it to me on camera, though, basically saying that in her words, there are some people who kind of find almost a commonality when they see the 4 criminal cases against former President Trump, in that they could identify with, in her words, kind of being attacked by the criminal justice system. And that's why it's leading more black voters into his column.
That is fascinating reporting, Blaine. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Got it.
And Chuck, I want to come to you, of course. It was surprising to see President Biden come and the campaign come out this morning. Do you think Biden coming out and wanting these debates comes from a place of strength or weakness here?
Look, I'll just say it's self-awareness. I think a lot of us have been wondering, why does the Biden campaign act like they're not losing? Okay, they're self-aware. And the fact of the matter is this, in some ways, is kind of a pragmatic decision they had to make. Because when you start to look at the calendar, the Olympics this year are going to be a bigger deal than normal. Number one, they're in Paris, so they're in Western Europe. We're all going to be paying more attention to it. But frankly, we didn't get an Olympics 3.5 years ago. We did, but we didn't because of COVID. So this is going to feel a bigger deal. That's blocking out a month, okay? So there's a month. The conventions they get your partisans. But how is he going to talk to the other 60% of America, right? He has figured out how to talk to his base and even people that are base adjacent. And I have to say, I didn't have early debate on my bingo card, but this is the type of thing they needed to do. They had to shake up this race because they couldn't afford to be in the exact same place come September 15th, right? They need to see what they can do now, start moving this needle now. And frankly, you suddenly realize July and August are off the table. See, it kind of almost had no choice but to find some big event, because our media is so fragmented now, Yamiche, that just doing a series of interviews isn't going to do it. How is he going to get to that other fragmented 60%, especially the people that are not interested in this race? Create a big event. All of a sudden, we're getting a Super Bowl in June? Okay, I'll watch that event, And that is, I think they're desperate to get some of these voters who've tuned out to tune in.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because President Biden and his allies, they whisper to you and to me, they say it on TV, they don't care about the polling. The polling is wrong. They're not worried about it.
They whisper it. Do you believe them when they say it to you?
Right.
Okay.
Well, the question is, when you have something like this where he's saying, like, no, I'm going to debate you in June, isn't it in some ways, isn't it an admission that they are watching the polls, that they are worried about this?
Yamiche, what is our first, watch what they do, not what they say. This is a classic case. Oh, no, we pay no attention to the polls. Joe Biden, I don't believe the polls. Let's have the first ever general election debate at the end of June. Geez, is there something in the polls? Look, I get it. Nobody ever wants to look weak. And I do think, look, this is something else I wrote about this week. I think one of Biden's problems, the age issue is a problem for him and not for Trump because it's combined with this perception of weakness. And in some ways, him being the one to dictate the debates now, I think allows him to look a little stronger. And I think they needed some moments like this. I have to be honest with you. I'm surprised at how quick the Trump campaign is agreeing to all this because it's Biden that needs these debates. Now, I have one thesis I have is they wanted to make sure Bobby Kennedy RFK Jr. didn't get in this debate. And it's very interesting when you read the CNN rules very carefully. It's not just polling. I think he could meet the polling threshold, 15% in 4 polls. It's are you on the ballot in enough states that add up to 270 electoral votes? By June 20th, I don't think he will be. Yeah. Now, he might be by the fall. And I think if both Trump and Biden believe they don't want Kennedy on that stage, I think by the fall, one of them is going to wish they actually may want Kennedy as a foil on that stage. But I do think that's why Trump must have agreed early, because he definitely doesn't want Kennedy on the debate stage. So he gets a one-on-one. He has to concede audience and he has to concede timing, but he does guarantee a one-on-one, and I think he cares about that more than anything else.
Well, I also have to ask you about the Trump trial. It just has not moved the needle, even though there's massive coverage of it, even though there are Republicans showing up in red ties and blue suits, sort of echoing his statements. What do you make of that, and why do you think that is?
I wrote about that today, and I flashed back to 1998, the Bill Clinton impeachment. And it was all about an affair with an intern. And Bill Clinton's approval ratings kept going up, not down. Everybody's like, I don't understand. What do you mean? And the issue was, it's the same issue. When did that Access Hollywood tape come out? It came out before the election. Why weren't more Americans upset about Bill Clinton? Because they knew Bill Clinton had affairs before they ever voted for him the first time. It is a major issue during his campaign. Voters knew Donald Trump had a, shall we say, colorful past and had certainly issues with women. This was factored in their vote. And this is why the voters have already they voted for him anyway, despite. And so unless you have new information that they didn't know, There was no new information on Bill Clinton that they didn't know in advance, which is why impeachment went nowhere and ended up backfiring on the Republican Party. And I think here, there's nothing about this story the voters didn't already know. The only new trial has new information that was going to potentially move the needle was January 6th. But I'll tell you, this trial has ruined that trial, because I think it has created this appearance, and you hear it in the way voters are talking. Oh, they were just trying to get him. First they tried this, now they tried this. And look, that's on Bragg, that's on the, that's on Merrick Garland, who probably should have started this investigation on January 6th a heck of a lot sooner and not waited till Liz Cheney did all the work for him.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to keep following all of that with all of the criminal issues that Donald Trump is dealing with. So thank you so much, Chuck Todd, for coming on.
I'm just glad we're going to get a debate before the 4th of July. That's great.
Thank you.
All right.
And then, of course, speaking of Decision 2024, you can get the latest reporting and details on where Donald Trump and President Biden stand on key issues using our NBC News Politics Tracker. Just scan the QR code on your screen now, or just go to nbcnews.com/campaign issues for more. Coming up, combat in Congress. I will talk to a member of the House Intelligence and Foreign Affairs Committees about new developments on the battlefields in Ukraine and Gaza that are raising concerns here in Washington. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Russia's assault on a crucial city in Ukraine gained new momentum today after Ukraine's army announced it was withdrawing troops from several villages in the Kharkiv region to avoid further losses. Local Ukrainian officials in the region described the situation as, quote, extremely difficult, as Russian troops claimed control over several areas. And a sign of just how serious the fighting has become, today Ukrainian President Zelensky announced he was postponing his upcoming foreign travel. The struggles on the battlefield come even as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken looked to reassure Ukraine of the administration's support. Blinken also announced a new $2 billion military funding package for Ukraine.
The assistance from the supplemental is on its way. In fact, some of it's already been delivered. But today I want to add to that by announcing that we will provide an additional $2 billion in foreign military financing for Ukraine. The newest support that I just announced, but particularly the $60 billion supplemental, we know is coming at a critical time.
Separately, the Biden administration is also expected to announce a new $1 billion weapons package for Israel. That comes even as the U.S. warns that Israel must stop, or will stop weapons shipments if Israeli forces invade Rafah. And on the humanitarian front, U.S. officials tell NBC News the massive floating dock set up by the U.S. is expected to reach Gaza in the next 24 hours. It will be used to help deliver critical aid soon after. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman from Colorado, Jason Crow. He is a member of the House Intelligence and Foreign Affairs Committee. So thank you so much, Congressman, for being here.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So earlier this month, you led a letter from more than 80 House Democrats to President Biden urging him to consider halting the sale of offensive weapons to Israel, citing concerns about aid getting into Gaza. The administration, of course, is now moving forward with this new $1 billion sales of arms and ammunition to Israel. Do you think the president is taking your concerns seriously here? And do you see this move by the president as rewarding Israel's actions by sending even more weapons to the country?
Well, the group of members that wrote that letter about a week ago, we are very concerned with what we view as a deeply flawed strategy in Gaza. If you look at what's happened over the last 6 months, almost 40,000 people have been killed. There are 1.1 million Palestinians who are on the verge of famine or have entered a stage of starvation, according to all the food and aid groups. And what we also see is that Hamas has not been destroyed. In fact, I would argue that there's been very little progress towards effectively destroying Hamas, the terrorist organization, which I firmly believe must be destroyed. But you're already seeing in North Gaza, when the IDF pulls out after conducting these offensive operations, Hamas is already recapitalizing. They're already popping back up. So clearly the strategy is not working, which is why we voiced our deep concern and why we want a very drastic shift.
Well, as you talk about the shift that you want, there were more than 24 House Democrats who sent a letter to the White House who were critical of the weapons shipments pause, meaning that they wanted to see those weapons go to Israel. What do you make of this split within the Democratic Party, your party?
Well, here's the deal. I want to provide some context. The United States provides weapons and equipment, munitions to over 60 countries around the world. Right? 7 of those are currently in armed conflict, Israel being one, Ukraine being another. In every single instance, every time, with every country, with every shipment, there are restrictions and limitations on those transfers. Why? Because the United States doesn't give these weapons and equipment out of charity. Right? They give it because we give it, and the American taxpayers support it because it's in our self-interest to do so. And it's the American people's money, and it should serve our interests. So there are always restrictions, there are always limitations on it. And with respect to Israel, let's give some history here. Dwight Eisenhower put limitations and withheld transfers in 1953. President Reagan did it in 1981, and again in 1982. President George H.W. Bush did it in 1992. So there's a long history of this being done to help shape better policy, and that's what we're calling for, is for us to support defensive aid, because we want to be able to make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend against attacks like Iran and others, but making sure that the offensive aid is better tailored to pursue better ends.
Well, as you talk about the offensive aid versus the defensive aid, I think the other thing we need to note here is that House Republicans are now planning a vote on legislation that would force the Biden administration to continue weapons transfers to Israel. The president said he would veto that bill, but I wonder, how would you vote on that legislation? And are you worried that that legislation has the votes it needs to pass? Do you think it has the votes there?
I don't know whether it has the votes. I will fiercely oppose that legislation. It's a very dangerous piece of legislation that sets a precedent that should not be set. And again, I think it's inconsistent with the interests of the American people and the American taxpayer. And I think it's inconsistent with the security interests of the people of Israel, who are not being well served by Prime Minister Netanyahu in this current military strategy that is doing great harm to Israel right now and not actually achieving the goal of dismantling Hamas.
I also want to play for you some of what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said today during a sit-down with CNBC. Take a listen.
I paraphrase it. A nation's got to do what a nation's got to do. And today we can.
But can you win this fight without American support?
Well, the answer is yes. Although we value American support, we want American support, I'll do everything that I can to get American support, but not at the expense of our survival and our security. When we have to, we stand alone. And against these savages, we have to win. We don't have a choice.
Now, President Biden said a major assault into Rafah would be his red line. We all, of course, remember, though, President Biden's red line when it came to the Assad regime in Syria. What should the consequences be, in your opinion, if Israel were to go forward with a major offensive in Rafah?
Well, first of all, I need to comment on Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments just there. It's beyond absurd, in my view. First of all, American military support is essential for Israel's peace and security, and that's why I have historically supported it. But Prime Minister Netanyahu has failed the people of Israel in almost every conceivable way. Right? Let's not forget that it was his failure on October 7th that set off this whole conflict and failed the people of Israel. And there's been no accountability for Prime Minister Netanyahu there. So certainly he has lost all legitimacy in my mind. So what I believe, and I've communicated this to the administration and to President Biden and his advisors, is that a ground offensive, a large-scale conventional ground offensive into Rafah would be devastating for Israel's security. It would be devastating for the people in Rafah, for the Palestinians. It would exacerbate what is already a terrible humanitarian catastrophe. It would result in untenable levels of civilian casualties that would actually make the security situation worse for everybody. So we certainly shouldn't support that with our munitions, and that's my longstanding view.
I want to ask you before you go about the issues going on in Ukraine. Ukraine's army says that it's withdrawing troops from around the Kharkiv region in response to this new offensive by Russia. It is unlikely, it seems, that Congress will appropriate any more money for Ukraine, given all of the fights that went in with the last aid package. Given that, how does Ukraine turn the tide in this war and really fend off Russia long term in this situation?
Well, there's no doubt this is a really critical time, and the consequences of some of my colleagues politicizing this aid and delaying it over 6 months are being seen on the battlefield right now, because the support that we appropriated just a couple of weeks ago has not yet arrived on the battlefield. The Ukrainians are fighting with incredible bravery and resilience, but they don't yet have the weapons and equipment that we have provided to them, so they are defending very fiercely. But here's the other thing, Yamish. Every single time people have said, you know, Ukrainians are on the ropes, Ukrainians are going to be defeated, Ukrainians can't address this assault or this offensive, every single time people have underestimated the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians have prevailed, right? And they have overcome odds after odds after odds, because they are some of the most courageous and resilient and brave fighters I have ever seen. So never underestimate the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people, certainly not in this instance. That's why we should continue to support them, because they will win at the end of this.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman, for your time.
Thank you.
And we are following breaking news out of Slovakia, where the country's Prime Minister, Robert Fico, is fighting for his life, according to local officials. He was shot multiple times in what the government is calling an assassination attempt. The video from the scene shows an attacker standing behind a barrier with a small group of supporters. As the Prime Minister approaches, he is shot multiple times in the stomach and the head before the suspect is tackled by security. Prime Minister Fico was airlifted to undergo emergency surgery, and he remains in extremely serious condition, according to his staff. The suspect was arrested, but we do not yet know the details about the gunman or his motives. Slovakia's outgoing president and the president-elect both called the attempt an attack on democracy. The White House released a statement condemning the attack. The pro-Russian leader has faced criticism for his authoritarian style of governing, including a recent move towards ending the country's independent press in favor of a broadcast with government ties. Up next, gold bars, envelopes stuffed with cash, and a Mercedes-Benz. It's all part of today's opening statement as the government accuses Democratic Senator Bob Menendez of, quote, being a public official who put greed first. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Donald Trump's hush money trial has the day off. But just a few blocks away, another high-profile criminal trial is underway. This one for current elected official. Opening statements have begun for Senator Bob Menendez's bribery trial in Manhattan. Prosecutors say the longtime New Jersey Democratic senator and his wife received cash bribes and gifts from 3 businessmen in exchange for political favors to help the governments of Egypt and Qatar. Menendez has pleaded not guilty. This is the second time Menendez has been tried on federal corruption-related charges. A jury was deadlocked during his 2017 trial, leading to a mistrial. NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian joins me now. Ken, thanks for being here. So how long can we expect this trial to go on?
Yamish, the judge was estimating that it could take as many as 6 to 8 weeks, which is one of the reasons it took so long to pick a jury. A lot of the 150 prospective jurors were not keen on staying for that long, but they did pick a jury today, and both the prosecution and Menendez's attorneys have now completed their opening statements. And prosecutors, Justice Department prosecutors, put this case in very stark terms. They said it's about a public official who put greed first. They said of Menendez, he was powerful, he was also corrupt. For years, he betrayed the people he was supposed to serve by taking bribes. Went on to describe the bribes: gold bars, envelopes stuffed with cash, a Mercedes-Benz. They say that Senator Menendez put foreign policy up for sale by taking money to do favors for the government of Egypt, including providing the Egyptian government with sensitive, non-public information. Now, in the opening statements of the defense, Menendez's lawyer denied that he took any bribes, didn't take cash, didn't take gold bars, called him an American patriot who did not violate the law, said the prosecutors are dead wrong, and interestingly tried to suggest that Senator Menendez's wife, Nadine, was responsible, for example, for the gold bars that were found in their house, and that Senator Menendez himself didn't really know the full extent of what was going on. It'll be interesting to see how far they push that defense. Nadine Menendez is charged as a co-defendant in this case, but she's not on trial today because she's suffering from health problems. She'll go on trial later. Yamish.
Very interesting. I also want to ask you, who will be the prosecution's key witness, do you think, here?
Well, they have one of the 3 businessmen accused of paying bribes, in this case, has pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate. And he's a person that Menendez allegedly intervened to try to stop a criminal investigation on his behalf. So that could be key testimony. There's also just a variety of testimony from various witnesses who can speak to exactly what steps Senator Menendez took as a public official to benefit these 3 bribe payers. And then they have the physical evidence of the bribes, the cash found in Senator Menendez's home. And he was not allowed to put on a witness, a psychiatrist who was going to argue that the reason he kept cash at his home is because of the trauma his family suffered when the Cuban government confiscated their assets. That testimony was excluded, so he won't be able to make that argument in front of a jury.
Dilanian, thank you. And after the break, if it's Wednesday, we've got election results. Maryland Democrat Angela Alsobrooks is officially taking on former Republican Governor Larry Hogan. It will be a critical race for Senate control this November. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. If it's Wednesday, we have election results from last night's primaries. The biggest race of the night was the Maryland Democratic Senate race. Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks beat out self-funded Congressman David Trone in the expensive contest. She will go on to face former Republican Governor Larry Hogan, who handily won his own primary last night. Now, Maryland will be key for Democrats' chances to holding on to the Senate. Meanwhile, Republicans hope the popular former governor's anti-Trump credentials will give him a boost in the solidly blue state. Joining me now for our panel is Eugene Daniels, White House correspondent for Politico and NBC News contributor, Meghan Hayes, former special assistant to President Biden, and Republican strategist Brad Todd. So, Eugene, I want to start with you. It's so interesting to me that Democrats in Maryland, they got their establishment candidate in Angela Alsobrooks, but they also got not the money of David Trone, who would have self-funded in November. So tell me a little about what you think Democrats are feeling today as they take in the results of this election.
Yeah, they're excited, right? They're excited that they were able to get the candidate that obviously a lot of the establishment in Maryland itself and National Democrats were interested in. But they do know now they have to spend money there, right? That is a thing that, and they were hoping that the Republicans would not pick Larry Hogan, that they would pick someone who maybe is a little bit more Trumpy, maybe a little bit not the best fit for the constituency of Maryland. That's not what they got. So now they're going to have to spend the money, whether or not Trone helps them in that. I think he said that he would give another $50 million if he was the candidate. I think that his $62 million he already spent for himself, probably he's going to keep that $50 million for now. They have to figure out how they're going to spend the money around not just Maryland, but there's a lot of places. And they also have to be honest with themselves, because there are places that they've done in the past where they spent a lot of money. In South Carolina, thinking they're going to take down Lindsey Graham in the past, right, with Jamie Harrison. Wasting money in races that ended up being not close at all. So they have to think a little differently than they have in the past, especially considering how the country's feeling right now.
And Brad, Eugene's talking about not wasting money. Do we think Republicans are going to put money into this Larry Hogan race? The idea, of course, being that they hope he can maybe get boosted by his anti-Trump credentials. But, of course, Maryland, as we said, it's a blue state. So are Republicans going to put the money there and just flip it?
Well, it is a tough state. You know, the last time Republicans had a strong candidate for U.S. Senate was 2006. Michael Steele, and he lost by 10. Typically, Democrats win the state by 20 or more. So that's the hill Larry Hogan's looking at. But he also is one of the most popular people in the state politics. He's probably got an approval rating up in the high 60s. And that's a pretty big number. Now, he's in the 40s on the ballot in the Senate race. So his challenge is to convert people who think he did a good job as governor to vote for him as senator. It's not the Republicans' best chance to pick up a seat. There are probably 7 places more attractive for Republicans to pick up a seat. But you ask about money. I think a lot of Republican donors have money they will spend on Larry Hogan they wouldn't give to other causes. Yeah. And so I think Larry Hogan will be well funded.
And Meghan, where do Democrats need to run the table here? Is it Maryland, or is it all these other states like Montana, West Virginia, others?
I think they have a really great chance in Maryland. I think that, you know, the difference here is Hogan has a high approval rating, but he's not running as a governor and running as an autonomous person. So they know that a vote for him is a vote for Mitch McConnell or JD, you know, those are the MAGA policies. So where he's not, those are what they're voting for if they pick him as a senator. So I do think that the Democrats will spend money here. I don't necessarily think they're going to need to spend quite the money they spent anywhere near in the primaries. But
you know, one challenge is that money won't go very far, though. Attacking Larry Hogan, you can't change a lot of voters' opinions about him, right? They know him, they have opinions of him. So a lot of money won't work.
The thing that they're going to be able to do is they're going to have to tie him to Mitch McConnell or whoever's next, right? Because Mitch won't be in charge. But they have to tie him to the Republican policies. They have to say, if you vote for Larry Hogan, we're going to lose the Senate as Democrats, right? That's the only way that they're going to be able to make this an easier race for themselves.
Yeah. I also, Eugene, I have to ask you about the big other story today, which is the debate. So many debates. There are 2 now, but there could be more. Who is maybe who does this benefit more, and who has more to lose when you think about what's happening today?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about debates nowadays is they don't really move people in kind of like I love this person, or I didn't like this person, now I love them. Like, that doesn't happen. I think, you know, at this point, President Biden, at least the Biden campaign and the folks around him, feel like they have the upper hand. They came to the table, they threw out what they wanted, and Donald Trump very quickly just agreed to a lot of it, right? and in a way that, you know, someone who's like wrote The Art of the Deal probably maybe wouldn't have done if he wasn't on Hugh Hewitt at the time. And so there's some folks in Trump world who do feel like, okay, maybe we move too fast on this. So it will be interesting to see how the negotiations go. Like, who actually wins is, I know this is going to sound kind of hokey, but the American people. It's really important to see these 2 men go back and forth, whether it's June and September, or they add more dates. I think the June date's interesting, one, because they won't be official nominees. So I don't know that this works in any other year, but also because, you know, that is before early voting starts. So this would be kind of the first time that we've had early voting as a country in different states, that people will actually get to see them on stage together before they actually go to the polls.
And Meghan, it's interesting. I was talking to Chuck Todd about this. The Biden campaign, maybe some of your old friends, they keep saying, we don't care about the polls, but then now we have a debate in June.
I mean, as someone who worked on the campaign when we did not poll well, you don't live and die by the polls. The president is not paying nearly as attention as the media is paying to the polls. I guarantee you that. But I do think that it's important because I do think it builds momentum. And Donald Trump did really poorly in the first debate last time, and his approval ratings went down, and his polling went down. And so I do think that it is important for them to take control of the narrative, because you go into conventions, you have the Olympics. There's a lot of things that are happening here that it's important for them to grab control of this narrative in the summer.
Yeah.
There's only one reason the incumbent president agrees to a June debate, because he thinks he has to. This is a desperate attempt by the Biden campaign to reboot. Things aren't going well for him, and he needs something to change it. Good news doesn't change it. Bad news doesn't change it. So he's hoping that this will change the election trajectory.
I wonder if we are also thinking about the fact that Trump said he wanted to debate. Biden said, fine, I want to debate too. Now it's like, I want more debates. Is there going to be more sort of goalposts moving here, Brad?
Well, a lot of voters are tired of both these guys, so they won't want to watch a lot of debates. But I do think the first one's going to matter, maybe more than in any recent campaign.
I also want to talk about, there's all this background on the Trump trial. Speaker Johnson commented again on the trial today. I want to take a listen to what he said a little bit about the trial and what we're hearing from him.
The people have to believe that we have equal justice under law. There's a reason that Lady Justice is depicted with a blindfold. There cannot be 2 tiers of justice. There can't be 2 systems. You can't exact political revenge on one political figure using the justice system and then give a pass to the other. That's what the American people see. And it doesn't matter how they try to spin it or make it into something that it is not. We see what is happening.
It's interesting, the argument that Speaker Johnson is making here. He's saying Republicans are basically being targeted, though, of course, we have Democrats. You have Bob Menendez on trial. You have Henry Cuellar. I wonder if you could talk a bit about whether or not Republicans are just going to keep saying this and keep saying this and hoping it sticks.
Well, 2/3 of the country believes that the prosecutions of President Trump are politically motivated. Now, some of those people don't like President Trump, and some of those people wish he'd go away. And so I think Speaker Johnson is making a pretty adept comment here, because he's trying to go to the weakest part of the argument against Donald Trump on these cases, which is that they're politically motivated in the middle of a campaign. I think we're seeing Mike Johnson be pretty savvy here and show some real leadership.
But at the same time, Hunter Biden, the president's son, is also has 2 criminal trials brought by his own Justice Department, right? And so the argument works, I think, for a lot of voters, but when you really dig into it, the argument that Trump is being treated differently than everybody else that's a Democrat, Hunter Biden is also seems very likely on June 3rd to start his first criminal case in Delaware. I will also say the question about whether or not it's politically motivated, voters really do believe that. When you talk to them, especially Trump folks, even some Biden folks, so Democrats will say, we don't care that's politically motivated if it happened, right? That's the rest of the sentence. But the Biden folks staying away from it as much as they have and not changing that trajectory, not changing that theory of the case, has probably been the smartest thing they've done, is like, if you just don't muddy it up and throw anything in there, then people will maybe leave you out of it.
They were basically staying away from it, the Biden campaign, except now they're selling t-shirts that say
Sure.
right, free on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is that a mistake? Do you think that they should have maybe not been as snarky in pointing to this trial, or was it something that was going to happen because it's just blanketing the airwaves?
No, I think that the president is a sarcastic person, as you guys have both known. He has a sense of humor, and I think that's what he's doing here. He's throwing shade at the former president. I don't think he's muddying the waters to what you're saying, which is an important thing to do, and sort of making these political arguments. Like, making a snarky comment, I think, is different than muddying the waters here, but they are, I mean, I think it's smart for them to stay away from it, and I think that you're right that these people just aren't, once you dig in, they just don't see that it's the same.
And Brad, I mean, Republican voters, we put them up, they're just not changing their minds. And a couple of them have said if he gets convicted that maybe they'll change their mind on Trump. But for the most part, Republican voters are just not really concerned about this, it sounds.
Well, you have a Democratic elected prosecutor in one of the most Democratic elected electorates in the country in Manhattan waging this case. I think Alvin Bragg's case and Alvin Bragg's jurisdiction and Alvin Bragg himself were probably the worst scenario for the Biden team to go first in these trials.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much to Eugene, Meghan, and Brad. Thank you for coming here. And coming up, a new report says 2 power failures aboard the massive cargo ship caused it to slam into Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge. We're live on Capitol Hill, where the head of the National Transportation Safety Board just testified on those findings. Next, you're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill today held a hearing on the deadly cargo ship collision that caused the collapse of Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge. The NTSB chair was one of 4 officials to testify about the federal response to the disaster, which killed 6 construction workers. The testimony comes just a day after the NTSB released a preliminary report on its investigation. That report found that the ship, Dolly, lost power twice before slamming into the bridge.
The ship had an emergency generator, which automatically started following the first blackout on the 26th. However, the generator only powers systems like emergency lighting, navigation, radio equipment, alarms, and a steering pump that allowed for low-speed, limited rudder movements. It does not power propulsion, and without the propeller turning, the rudder was less effective. They were essentially drifting.
Ryan Nobles covers Capitol Hill for NBC News. He's also covered the bridge collapse in the days after the disaster, and he joins me now. So, Ryan, the NTSB's report yesterday said that the Dolly lost power twice the day before the accident. Did those outages have anything to do with what happened the next day?
I think that is the big question that the NTSB is trying to answer right now, Yamiche, and they point out that this is out of the ordinary, that a vessel of this size would lose power 2 different times before it would leave on the type of voyage that the Dolly was set to take out on the following day. And the NTSB chair in her testimony today pointed out that they moved to a backup breaker system, a system that hadn't been used in months. Now, that's not out of the ordinary. Sometimes that happens, but they do have serious questions as to just how reliable that breaker system was, especially given the fact that it failed the very next day. So they have yet to definitively link these 2 separate power outages, but it does seem like a pretty incredible coincidence, and it is the first we're learning of it, and it has become a key part of this investigation, Yamiche.
Certainly a lot of questions around that. Of course, how much does the NTSB also know about what caused the ship to lose power the night that it struck the bridge?
It really doesn't have a lot of answers yet, Yamiche, and they are, that's part of the reason that their investigators are still there on the ship. In fact, the chair of the NTSB testified that there were investigators on the ship during her testimony today, and they have been there every single day since the ship crashed 50 days ago. And remember, that ship is still in the middle of the Patapsco River. It is yet to be moved. So they believe that this is going to be a long-term investigation where they're trying to piece apart everything that could potentially go wrong. They're talking to the manufacturers of the power grid. They're talking to the owner of the ship. They're talking to the crew members. It is a very complex and very intricate vessel that we're talking about here. This isn't something where they can easily determine what went wrong, and it was likely a series of things that went wrong that led to this terrible disaster.
It was a terrible disaster, and with that in mind, after today's hearing, what might Congress likely do to take the action here to maybe try to prevent some of these?
Well, there's a long list of things that Congress is at least looking into, and there's obviously the issues specifically related to the Dali itself, to that company, to the conduct of the crew members leading up to the accident. But there's also they can also widen their aperture and look at the issue of these massive bridges and these massive shipping containers that are going underneath them, and try and figure out, sometimes things just go wrong. How do you prevent a shipping container from careening into the base of a bridge? And many of the newer bridges that are being built around the country have what they call these dolphin barriers that basically would force a ship to ground before it got to the point where it would smash into the base of a bridge, especially because many of the bridges that are being built now are even taller. They cover much wider spans than they have in the past. So there's a long list of things Congress is looking into.
Well, Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill, thank you so much. And I'm back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.